The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, hello everyone. Greetings. I'm very happy that you're all here with us. Today, through our webinar, we have the Facility Management Guide to the Internet of Things in the smart buildings. This topic has been very popular within this period. It's trending. So together with our expert trainer, Mr. Geoff Williams, we will go through the material itself through like a 1 hour and a half of a webinar. The last 30 minutes of our webinar, it's for questions and answers. So feel free to send the question through your question window, and we'll go through them. And in the last 30 minutes, we will answer all the questions. Geoff, you can share some information about yourself, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, guys.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Laszlo, do you want me to start a few minutes early then?
Well, yes. I mean, a couple of minutes early, people will join up. I mean, so far we have here like a 61 attendee, and
okay.
So far, I mean, they will join up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have the ability to present this topic to such a large audience. I'm very excited about the presentation today, and really excited to hear your questions as we get going. I've been teaching for a number of years. I teach in a variety of different locations, including the Middle East and Europe and North America. I've been very active in the association that I'm part of, the International Facility Management Association. I've been on the Global Board of Directors, and I'm currently a director on their Americas Advisory Board. I'm a co-author and editor of the Facility Manager's Guide to Information Technology, and some of the things that you're going to hear today are related to that textbook, which we are in our second edition. And it has both the kind of a hard copy version and a Kindle version that are available to purchase if it was something that interested you. Certainly not a requirement for the webinar. And really, I want to sort of share the passion that I have for process improvement, technology, the kind of the ideas that technology can really improve our built environment and the opportunities that it presents. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do a really brief case study. There's a video on a newer building in Amsterdam that is really cutting edge, really to kind of get our juices flowing, get our ideas out there. And then we're going to move into sort of a little bit about IoT, what it is, why it's important to facility management. And then we'll start to get into some of the questions around security and the concerns that people have around security, and then of course privacy. What I've been finding over the last little while is that there are changes coming to the global market around privacy, where I think technology has the ability to do all sorts of great things, but there is a trade-off between what it can do and kind of what information you need to give up to get there. So we'll get into that as we go through today as well. I'm going to start with a video, and the idea behind the video is that I want you to look at it and tell me all of the different technologies that you see. And I'm going to have to sort of imagine what you're saying because of the webinar technology, but I'll run them down. But I think it would be helpful for you to write them down as you watch the video, just to see the things that you're seeing. Look at it from a lens of privacy. Look at it from a lens of security. And then think about the regulations in the region that you live in and see if there are things that you think may not apply in the region that you're in, or you would not be able to do. Okay, I'm going to share the video now. Okay, so it's a very interesting building, and we definitely saw a lot of different technologies there. I think that there's kind of a bunch of different buckets of technologies. We saw a lot of technology that was related to the sustainability of the building. We saw things that were really based in the design that would only have been able to be accomplished with building information modeling, to understand the the positioning and relationship to the sun, and helping to understand how to do the daylight harvesting and all of the things around the solar energy. But that would be reliant heavily on a building information modeling tool to be able to do that correctly. The idea that they are generating power out of an aquifer is not kind of a new thing, but it is something that is really unique to that building, in that they are able to generate all of their thermal capacity using that system, and the heat pumps generated from the power. When we get into IoT, though, we start to have these kind of interesting conversations. So now we've got a connected lighting system, and it talks about the idea that it's generating a tremendous amount of power, and that tremendous amount of power, or sorry, tremendous amount of data. Tremendous amount of data is really starting to shape how people are using the building and how they're influencing the building. You look at every light fixture as an internet, it's a thing in the Internet of Things. Every one of them has the ability to monitor movement, light, temperature, infrared, and all of those things are going back to the database. So there's a lot of information being harvested, a lot of information about the building. So we're not into a privacy issue there, because right now the light fixture really doesn't know who we are. As soon as you start to tie it to an app, and you start to add that layer of complexity in on the analytics, all of a sudden you've got a situation where you are measuring information about a person. And that's where we're starting to get into some ideas of data privacy. Now, when you look at the way that that building is set up, they have an end user agreement when they sign up on the app. What I can guarantee you is that very few people read that end user agreement. If you think about the apps that you install on your Android device or your iPhone device, how often do you read the licensing agreement with that? And so thinking about that and understanding that you are giving up a certain amount of privacy. Now Deloitte, or whoever the business is that runs the building, has a very clear understanding of who you are and what you do and how you move about the building. It may change how they manage a worker. It may change what the expectations are. There may be questions about how much time you spend in a coffee station. All of those things come into play on a small scale with data privacy. In Europe, there's a new privacy regulation called GDPR, which is really heavily kind of modifying how people look at things. There was a lot of technology recently around facial technology or facial recognition that was allowed to be installed in certain buildings. And it used to be purely for security purposes, for international security, police forces, but it was starting to be used to recognize people and recognize temperature settings, needs, what you want, how you want to take your coffee, to help you understand where to park, all of those different things. But that means that the geometry of your face is being stored by the business that is providing that service. So we've got this idea of we're accepting the terms and conditions of an app, and we like the idea of the tools and the technology, that the services that we get from it. But I don't know that we're always understanding the trade-off that we're giving, because we're giving up something of our own self in order to get that information. And other regions are starting to develop it. The one that I've seen that's most robust is the GDPR in Europe. It was launched a little over a year ago, and it has really heavily influenced what's going on. Okay, so now there's some Internet of Things in the building. Certainly the things that we were using in that building were the lighting system. We were certainly using the apps and the user interface and the information that comes out of the phone device, the smartphone. But what kinds of devices really do we typically have an ability to touch and feel? And the reality is that we touch and feel probably a lot more in our personal lives. We have things that we see all the time. Some of you may have a Nest thermostat or some other type of smart thermostat for your home. Others may have a doorbell, like a Ring doorbell that has a camera attached to it and it's wireless enabled. Digital assistants, Google Home, Alexa, all of those things have the ability, and they are Internet of Things. They are computing devices that are distributed. Certainly in my home, I have some lighting controls that are wireless, and then we're seeing a lot more integration into security systems at home. So all of those things are tools that we use to have a better creature comfort at home. The Nest thermostat gives us better control over our energy consumption. The Ring doorbell helps us understand who's at our door, even if we're not at our home. Digital assistants help us in our day-to-day lives. But we are giving up some information. So if you think about the digital assistant, one of the things that I've had happen a few times now is we'll be watching television. Alexa will be sitting in the corner on the desk, and the word, something similar to Alexa, will come up. And as soon as it does, she starts talking to us. And we were watching a show. It was a television program, Suits, and the line on that show said something like, this other type of digital assistant made Alexa look like a toaster oven. Well, I can tell you that immediately after we did that, she was shopping for toaster ovens and found us a deal on a Black & Decker toaster oven. So that means that those tools are always listening. And even if they're not hearing the command word, they still have the ability to listen. And we've heard stories recently about the ability for engineers and software engineers at those companies to actually tag a device and listen. So there is some privacy that we're giving up for that value of the tool. And there is a news feed out there of all the different things that seem to have been overheard by digital assistants. The other one is Netflix was hacked, and all of the devices that are using Netflix. So you think about everything that has Netflix enabled. So we have TVs, we have phones, we have DVRs, we have other devices that are all Netflix enabled. That tool was revealed to have an opportunity for people to create a denial of service attack. So it used an entire network of bots and was creating denial of service attacks on other systems. And so they were not impervious to the security that we thought was embedded in them. And our devices in our homes were being used for denial of service attacks, which was causing other websites to go down. So if you think about everything that's infected on your home network, maybe even just everything that has Netflix on it, you have a tremendous amount of challenge in an IoT security. So then when we start to transition into the way the IFMA community has been looking at it, they created an IoT Task Force, because we know that IoT is something that we're starting to see a lot of, and it's really exciting, and there's a lot of tremendous benefits out of it. And one of the things that we know as an industry is that we are already using building control system data and understanding, are we at risk from that perspective? And what about all these other sensors that we're talking about adding in as a part of an Internet of Things? And then, how does the kind of the value and then the possible risk impact services that we provide for facility management, either in a hard service or a soft service? And then, we're talking about a technology that is relatively new. It's starting to get to a maturity state in certain areas, but we want to make sure that we're not getting into a technology that's either bleeding edge and we won't be able to purchase it in the future, or it's something that's going to be more common practice so that it doesn't become very difficult or complex to service. So that was what the reason of the IoT Task Force was created for. And it was really to try and figure out some of the answers to all these things so that we could provide tools and techniques to our membership. What we started to come up against was this idea that if somebody wasn't wasn't friendly to your business, they may have access to your building control system. And honestly, when you look at some of these devices, Ring was a good example. The basic security that comes on the devices often isn't changed. And so whether it's a factory set password, or the firmware isn't being updated, or all of those things, what we've been finding over time is that there's a tremendous issue in the way that people are managing these devices, even if we go back to some of the legacy things that we've all had for years around building controls. So there is a search engine that can actually sense out connected devices that are either BACnet or Modbus enabled, that are exposed on the internet, or have no meaningful security feature, which means that they may be secured, but they're secured with the password that came by default from the system. So when we go to the next slide, this is a gentle search using Census, and you see the number of devices that are available. So what it did when it did that particular search is that there were almost 24,000 Modbus devices that were exposed across the world. And you can see that some countries are more dense than others, and probably the countries that you expect to have sort of really detailed building control systems are the ones that were exposed more heavily. And we can see that in the Middle East and in Europe and North America, a little bit in China, a lot of exposure. So what could happen is we can actually go in and browse those devices, and we can edit some of the functions on them with no authentication. And that's a bit of a scary thing, because there's an opportunity to turn those into bots, or to really mess with a company's control system. What it was determined, in North America, we have a department store called Target in the United States, and they determined that the hack from, they had a stolen credit card numbers, was actually related to an entry point that was on a building control system. So it allowed a bridge into the network through the building controls, and then from there, the hackers were able to gather the information about credit cards. We look at BACnet, which is a kind of a common protocol that we all use, and there are, again, almost 17,000 devices that are available and editable. And this is a scary thing. I think everyone around the room should be scared about this. Not necessarily because your business may be exposed, but it's an approach that has been taken traditionally over a long period of time. And if a similar approach were to be taken through Internet of Things, because these sensors that we're talking about for a lot of the Internet of Things sensors are small, we're looking to mass produce them, mass install them. We could create tens of thousands of exposures for our own business just with one deployment. So we have to be very, very careful and thinking hard about how we go about doing an IoT deployment. So I blanked out the manufacturer and the vendor of this particular product, but it's a web card on an HVAC system, and it is accessible. This is right through the Census tool. You log into a particular device, and you're into the system. There's no encryption to protect the password in transit. So even if we were to say that it didn't have password protection or anything beyond factory default, we could imagine that a good hacker could actually grab that password and username in transit, because it's sent as clear text. So, and this type of system, I believe this one was actually used as a split system in a computer room environment. And if you were able to turn off the cooling or really heavily adjust the set point, you could have millions of dollars of damage to equipment, computing equipment. But the other piece to that is that all of the data and all of the business criticality that goes with those servers is at risk as well, at least in that one node of that business's data support. But in this case, the password was defaulted and the original firmware was still installed. So if we think about all of the different updates that we need to do to firmware as hackers get better and better at hacking things, we need to make sure that we're keeping up to date. So we know that we keep our Windows systems up to date, we keep our iPhones and Androids up to date. All of these devices need to be kept up to date because the ability for a hacker to access them changes over time. It's not really just sort of a one and done thing. We want to make sure that we are manipulating our devices to make sure that they are updated and current and protected as best we can against current security protocols. Only then should we be looking at safely adding devices to our infrastructure. And so in this case, there was a product that was shipped, which is a really elegant looking environmental control system on the left-hand side. And it was shipped with a hard-coded user account and password. That didn't get changed, it was exposed. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how you position that because you can keep it from being exposed inside your network as well. The original firmwares of the Ring video doorbell allowed a person to gain access to the Wi-Fi SSID and password of your own network. So if you think about that, all of a sudden you could be using a nefarious organization could be using your network in your home to do things on the internet without even you knowing. So that's a very interesting thing. Or somebody could be sitting out in the street next to your home and using your network to hack or to do things that would be illegal otherwise. And then you get into medical devices where there is confidential data that's stored on a medical device. And we have to be very careful that that confidential data, whether it's on a medical device or anything on our network, doesn't get exposed to the outside world. And really, the intention of this presentation, this piece of the presentation, isn't to scare you. It's to sort of give you an idea that there are opportunities to fix this. So the first thing, as we talked about, is to make sure that we are confirming that our devices are updated regularly and don't carry sort of default password settings and all of those things. But the other thing is that we can put all of our devices behind our firewalls, and if we need a point-to-point communication so that we can access our HVAC system or our BACnet devices, we can do that over a VPN tunnel, which is encrypted, and the communication sits between the firewalls. That is a far better way to set up your network. You do not really want those devices set up to be IP accessible on the public internet. It adds another step for some people. You have to make a connection securely to your VPN so that you can access the information. But when you look at the idea that now you've created a layer of security that others can't crack because the encryption on VPNs is very, very strong, you have the opportunity to protect yourself. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. So if we're starting to think about some of the lessons that we're learning for smart buildings, these are the kinds of things that we would start to say when you're getting started. These are the things that you should be asking. And so these are true lessons learned by people that have been there and done that from an IoT perspective in smart buildings. So the first question that you want to ask yourself is, what can your building or portfolio gain from being smart? And that's a really important question to ask because there are all sorts of glamorous things out there that you can do. There's really cool things at the edge building. Likely they're very expensive in some cases. And what you want to understand is the net benefit to your organization or to your building, to energy, to occupants, productivity, whatever it is, because you're going to eventually be asked to put together a business case that talks about a return on an investment. And the idea of making a building smart is really an investment in the building to either improve the asset value, improve the productivity of the worker, improve the output of the business. All of those things still hold true. What we find as new technologies emerge is a lot of people want to do things because they're cool and they're really interesting. And there are a lot of very, very interesting things about smart buildings. But if they don't match the business need, or you can't quantify the value against what you're doing with those tools, it's maybe not the right thing for you. Maybe there's a very small piece of IoT that works for you. Then the next step is to develop a plan. One of the biggest things that I see in people deploying tools like this, any technology tools, that they don't plan it. They look to the vendor to give them all of the input that they need. They look at the tools being implemented, like buying an iPhone at the store, and they don't make a quality plan for how to use the information, what you're going to do with it, and how you're going to do it, how you're going to implement it, how you're going to maintain it. If I put 1 million devices into my system, and I know that that's an astronomical number, how am I going to make sure that the firmware is updated? How am I going to make sure that if they're battery operated, that we change the batteries on a frequency? How am I going to make sure that the positioning and the data quality that's coming out of them is valuable to me? All of those things, once you have a plan, then you want to start to look at a reliable vendor. And I think some of the things that you're going to see is that the market landscape has been evolving dramatically, and it will continue to evolve dramatically, but you want to make sure that you've got a vendor that's reliable. From my perspective, I think the other thing that you really want in a vendor is a vendor that isn't just sort of does one thing. You want a vendor that can support or integrate into an ability to do multiple things with your IoT. And I've seen companies in the marketplace that their core business is one thing. Maybe it's vibration analysis, and they have a sensor for vibration analysis, but they don't have a sensor for differential pressure. They don't have sensors for other things. And so what you want to do is make sure that you've at least understood the landscape of how you're going to integrate all of that information. We're going to talk about the value of the data in a little bit. Certainly you want to make sure that you understand the security and maybe the potential and the vulnerabilities to what you're doing, because it's a huge deal. If we think about Target and people's credit card information being stolen, we don't want to be the organization that's on the news where personal data has been stolen. We want to be the business that's on the news that we've been really successful in our quarter end earnings, and then the facility manager is out in front because they did some amazing things with IoT, not the other way around. And the other piece is that this is a technology implementation, and the group inside our organization that knows the technology and technology implementation the best is your IT department. The benefit of having an IT department that is really in tune with you is going to be tremendously valuable in an IoT implementation. My guess is that if I was to ask the audience, what we would find is that a lot of your organizations, the IT department is really set up around your core business and not as well adept at setting up around the facility management business. I think this is a relationship that you need to build and foster over time, because they need to understand the impact that we as facility managers have around the core business. We have the ability to improve productivity. IoT's got some amazing opportunities inside that. We're going to see a couple in a minute. But if we can build that relationship, help them understand what we're doing and why we're trying to do it, we get a tremendous opportunity that we never had before, especially in the relationship piece with our IT department. Okay, the next slide and the next several slides are actually sort of principles that are coming out of the textbook that I described earlier, and there's a picture in the bottom right for these slides. I want to give credit where credit is due. The textbook was a joint venture between the IFMA technology community and GEFMA's CAFM working group. And when they define the acronym CAFM, they're looking at anything that's computer aided in facility management. And it was a really interesting process, and we got some great information out of it. I'm happy to share some of that today. So Gartner has a hype cycle that they use, and really it's a great tool for assessing, where we're at in the cycle of adoption and value for a new technology tool or any technology tool. And I think probably people would have different feelings about this, but over the past few years, I think that we got heavily into, depending on the vendor, depending on the tool, we got into a peak of inflated expectations. I was hearing IoT in every sentence that I was talking to people on, and that typically means to me that we're at the peak of that inflated expectation, and it can do wild things. It's very amazing. But harnessing it to be able to do that, think about it like a wild horse. You need to be able to figure out how to get that horse to run in a straight line and do the things that you want. So I think we're starting to see, in some cases, a plateau of productivity, but really we have technologies that are emerging that are in any point in this hype cycle. So we really want to understand, if we're looking at a tool, where in the hype cycle does it sit? Okay. Now, there are all sorts of different places where we can use IoT. And what we have to understand is that there are opportunities in all of these areas. So I'm going to talk about it one by one. So there's an opportunity to get quality user feedback on their experience. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a person telling you what they're doing. What you may get is a person's actions, and some of these other sections will give you more of a person's actions of really how they're feeling about the space. But think about those 3 or 5 button things that you see outside of a washroom in the airport. Now, I have to say that I'm not really a person that wants to touch a button as I'm leaving the washroom. But what they're doing is they're trying to correlate information on user feedback and experience with the use of that washroom. So that 5 button thing is a thing. It's an Internet of Things. It's connected back. It's showing data. It's time-stamped. It's understanding volume. And what it will allow us to do is augment the service that we're providing to that washroom. And we may get to a point where we just, and I've seen this happen, we have a counter that goes above the door, and we know that if we have more than 30 people through that restroom in a period of time, then the cleaning needs to be touched up. And it's dispatched automatically, rather than doing it on a periodic frequency. And if you think about an airport, there are busy times of the day in an airport, and there are quiet times of the day. There are busy piers at the airport versus quiet piers at different times of day. So the idea that we can use our staff in a very dedicated way to cultivate, the green smiley face on the 5 button survey is really valuable. And we can start to drive opportunities and in kind of economies of staffing. We can look at the ability to improve user experience while saving money. All of those different things on headcount, for instance, or on cleaning materials or supplies or anything that might be dangerous to the environment because we're using it more frequently than we need to. We can look at the climate. We can look and understand inside our building very quickly. And this, sure, we've been able to do this, some of it with a building automation system, but the ability to do it in a much more comprehensive way, more set points, more thermostats, more information about carbon dioxide and humidity and all of the things that cause occupant comfort issues. We could get to a point where, and you'll see on the next slide, where we understand why a person is not staying in a space for very long, or why a meeting shouldn't be in a room more than 45 minutes because the CO2 level goes up. Maybe the room was designed as an office and it's set up as a meeting room for 6 people. We can get a better understanding of how we're using energy, and we can profile that information. We can look at the idea of fault analytics on our equipment, and or real-time sensing around vibrations or infrared or hotspots on our mechanical or electrical systems. All sorts of different tools for hard FM that were never available for us before. We were doing daily rounds to listen, smell, see, but we can get real information that says, okay, well, the vibration was this yesterday and it was this tomorrow. But if you looked at that trend over a 30-day period, what you could see is that gradual incremental change in vibration, which means that we're starting to get to a failure state. And we can change out equipment, we can repair equipment, we can do all of those things in a planned way, and with no downtime, or at least a planned downtime for our occupancy. You think about the idea, in North America we call it Murphy's Law, which is if something can go wrong at the wrong time, it will. The opportunity from that condition piece to understand when things might be going wrong, think about it like the symptoms of a heart attack versus actually having a heart attack, and treating that well before the person actually has a heart attack. Really, really interesting stuff. Desk space and occupancy. There's a tremendous opportunity there because we know that the kind of the space that we have in a building is a really high value from a real estate perspective. Every square foot that we have, we pay for. We pay for it through rent, we pay for it through energy costs and all of the services that embed in that space. One of the big challenges that we have is understanding, especially in a hot desking scenario, who's using how much space, and do we have enough? Do we have enough of the right space? Do we have too little? And starting to use sensors, and even as simple as a pressure sensor on a chair to understand if that chair is occupied or not, can help us understand and possibly save a tremendous amount of money on real estate because we know we've got 25% more. There are kiosks that will help us understand, where space could be available. So we walk into a building, we don't have a space reserved for the day, and the kiosk will help us understand where we want to go. So that's one opportunity. The other that I've seen based on that demand side is I've seen heat maps generated based on the data that's coming out of it of total use of space. And so when you look at it, you get this idea that there's a total use of space, and for some reason the space is weighted more heavily to one side of the building. And a colleague was actually involved in a project that they were trying to understand why the space was being used differently on one side of a building to the other. And so they started to look at, well, is it heat load? Is it air quality? Are the desks newer? Are the chairs nicer? Or, cleaning better? Whatever it is, natural daylight. But what they found was that it was actually that the Wi-Fi and cellular service was better on one side of the building than the other. So a very simple tweak, and they actually really kind of reclaimed a bunch of space that they really hadn't been able to use. So people were complaining there was never a desk available. The analytics showed that there was a tremendous amount of vacancy. What they found out was that there was never a desk available in a spot where you could make a phone call. When you start to talk about indoor air quality, we can actually get to a point, as I said, with the meeting room, where we could say, the system will warn you that you don't want to have a meeting in this room for longer than an hour because the air quality gets to be poor. Or you only want to have a meeting with 3 people in this room for longer than an hour because the air quality will sustain into an hour and a half type meeting. All of those different things we have the opportunity for in an Internet of Things scenario. But again, if you get to the thing that I was describing earlier with the number of things that we might have and the complexity and sophistication that we might have in the number of things, we are likely going to run into some challenges because we're going to have so many things. We've got to manage all of those. And it's going to create masses of data, tremendous amounts of data. So if you think about, let's just go back to something that we really understand as a group. So a lot of you will use Google Maps or Waze or something like that, maybe Apple Maps, to help you navigate when you're driving, when you're walking, even indoors in some locations. So we use those tools. I think that there's a really important piece to understand that it is an Internet of Things. The GPS sensor in your phone and the connectivity of it, it's a thing, no question about it. And the value that we get for using our thing and allowing our thing to be accessible and the data to be accessible to Google is that we get traffic profiles. We get the red city street. We understand where there's a crash on the highway. We understand all of these things because it's crowdsourced information, which is fine. And we get a great value out of it because you know that you can go around that traffic accident, or you can call somebody to say that you're going to be 45 minutes late for a meeting or an appointment. But imagine how many devices are attached, how many mobile phones there are, how much data Google is both storing and analyzing to give that information. It's tremendous. It's a lot of data. And we've given up a certain amount of our privacy to Google to be able to do that. The other piece that we need to understand is that is the sort of the secondary product of what what Google is really after. The data and the trends and the migration patterns and all the things that they're trying to understand through Google Maps is really not to help us. We're actually their product. We're the person going around collecting data for them. The product that they have is what they can use to sell to their partners. Insights, giving information that will help somebody solve another problem, maybe sell another product. That is what Google is doing. They are selling insights and the opportunity for insights. So when we get to IoT for our own self and our own scale, when you start to gather all of the different things that we've been talking about, there is a correlation between user experience and climate. There is a correlation between climate and consumption. What is interesting is that you can get insights from any one of those 5 areas. You can get information that will help you make decisions on a day-to-day basis in a very empirical way because you've got hard data. You've got a lot of hard data, and you need to understand how you're going to manage and capture and analyze it. But if you start to take 1 or 2 of those data sets and layer them on top of the other, what you should get is really interesting insights that you wouldn't have ever guessed. Some of the individual ones you might guess as to what's going on, but when you start to layer in kind of demand and user experience and climate and consumption against each other, what you might find out is that there's a tremendous opportunity that you'd never considered because it really wasn't self-evident. But you now have a whack of data. I think most people would call it big data in that situation, that you're able to mine, overlay, and start to get an insight that will help you understand something that you never really understood before. What we're seeing as time passes is the tools that we're getting for the analytics are really improving, and they're getting to the point in most cases where you put a data set together, you try and set the commonalities between the data sets, and then you get a natural language and interrogatory situation. So they'll give you real-time insights coming out of it, things that the system is seeing, but then you can ask the system questions. You can ask the systems questions like you do your Google Mini or your Google Home. The opportunity to say, what is happening here? And the system will go and analyze it. We're getting much closer to that. What we need to understand is that the advent of machine learning and then artificial intelligence is going to start to drive that. Whole other set of issues around privacy when we get into those things, and that isn't for today's topic. But the opportunity to lay each one of these data sets on top of each other and find insights that we've never thought of as possible is very tremendously interesting. Okay, so last piece in this section. There's a lot of information that we're getting, and we want to have that value and diversity of the things that we're getting out of it. But when we go to implement, what we want to understand is the 4 areas on the right. We want to make sure that we've made a great plan that allows something with simplicity, because we're talking about a tremendous pool of devices that we're looking at using. And we needed to make sure that the installation process is manageable, the update process, if there's battery, whatever it is, we want to make sure that we don't create more work for ourselves than the value that we're creating by that installation. It needs to be something that's carefully thought out and elegant. The next piece is the scalability. We talked a little bit in the last slide about the idea that sensors are continuously producing data, and they're creating high volumes of data. We need to be able to actually have the storage ability to store those high volumes of data and cope with that amount of information as we analyze it. So there's a structure that needs to go around it outside of just the storage capacity. We've talked a lot about security today, and we want to make sure that we are maintaining that critical data for our business, because there may be stuff that's in there that's business sensitive or private in nature, but at minimum, we know that these devices can be a bridge into other data sets that are private and business critical. And then the other thing that we need to understand is that some of the things that we're going to be looking for from an insight perspective need to be harvested in real time. The value that I described in the cleaning process of a washroom in an airport is only if we can actually trigger something in a work order system that says cleaning team needs to go to this washroom within the next 15 minutes. If they wait for a half an hour, we've probably lost that opportunity, and we're going to start to get red frowny faces on the kiosk. So, but then there's other things like the vibration analysis that I described. We don't really need to know that in real time unless maybe a point of interrogation shows that the bearing is gone on a motor or something like that, where it's gone from sort of a slow change in state to an aggressive change in state, which means that we're having a failure. But generally, that stuff can be processed at a later time or on a frequency. So we need to understand where our computing power is going to be used and how it's going to be used. Okay, so the next piece is that often we get into a situation where organizations need to ask themselves a bunch of questions. So I think, and I've heard a lot of stories about this over the years that I've been doing presentations. I think understanding if your organization is culturally ready for the digitization age. And what you may find is that while people are saying that they are ready, culturally the organization cannot adapt to the idea of digitization. The edge, there is an end user agreement that goes with that app. While I agree that most people probably haven't read the end user agreement, it culturally would not work in a lot of organizations. The idea that you're sharing information about yourself. I've personally had people that work for me that are very, very concerned about the amount of information that is tracked about them and around them. And they do not want that information to be stored outside of the organization, or they don't even want it to be available. So I know people that have turned off location settings on Google Maps. I know that people have, I'm sure each of you know a lot of people that put a piece of tape over their camera on their laptop. All of those are done because people are concerned about some of the things that we have an opportunity to do now. So you need to understand if the organization is ready for it. I think the baseline solutions. So, and when we're talking about the right solutions in place, I think we're talking about the infrastructure. So are we ready to take on the capacity of what we're talking about? Do we have, if we were talking to our IT, do you have the storage availability for terabytes and terabytes of data? Do we have the tools in place to analyze that data? What would we need to do to get ready for that? Even if we're just talking in some cases about network traffic. And what band of radio communications are we going to be talking about? And should we be looking at truly just a Wi-Fi or a LoRa network or some other kind of low bandwidth but high distance type of network strategy so that we can transmit data from sensors across broad distances or through concrete walls or those types of things? Do we have what we need to start with? I always look when we're starting any technology project to understand, if we're actually happy with where we're at right now from a current solutions perspective. If I think about the number of organizations that I talk to and hear that they've got a building automation system and they've got a maintenance management system, and the two things are not talking together in some way. It's a manual interface where a person gets an alarm from the system and triggers. There are all sorts of opportunities that we can have, that we can start where we are. We have differential pressure sensors on our air handling units. Could we just change the way we do maintenance on our filters to be triggered by differential pressure? And honestly, it doesn't have to be, today we get an alarm that says we have to do our filter changes. No, generally it's fairly straight line. We know that pressure change is going to be consistent over time. And we could predict that in 30 days from now, we are likely going to need to change our filters. So all of those different things that we have an opportunity to do right now without really making any change to anything. I think we should probably look at those things first, because there are opportunities, the low or no cost opportunities to save labor, to save energy, to improve efficiency, all of those things before we get into taking on new challenges. Looking at the building that we have right now and understanding, kind of the SWOT analysis, really. What are our strengths and weaknesses? Where are the opportunities and threats? If we can do that ahead of time before we do an audit, we can focus an audit. Remember, if we get into doing too much at once, we're going to have more than we can take on at any one time. So let's try and focus an audit to understand the highest and best use of what we're going to do, so that when we get into a long-term strategy, we can start knocking things off. I already talked about the idea of the low-hanging fruit, the things that are low or no cost, and high value. Honestly, there's probably a lot of those things that each of your organizations have that you may even want to get into before you get into an IoT implementation. But at least understand where you're at from your audit. That's a really important step. Making sure where all of our data sits. In the courses that I teach, we talk about the data register and the facility register for all the information that we have about our facility. We're going to try and do an integration, and we're going to try and overlay data sets to get more and more insight. We need to understand where that's at, and let's be very, very clear. We can overlay the data set from our building automation system with our CMMS system with maybe one IoT installation, rather than having to do 5 or 6 different purpose-built IoT installations to get the same results. We've got the opportunity right now to analyze that information, and we have more than one data set typically right now. Trying to understand how to most effectively benchmark. So I think the first thing that you need to do very, very clearly is to develop a baseline. Understand what your benchmark is today. Where are we starting from? And that way, when we start to look at the improvements that we're trying to make, remember, we're talking about a business-driven case. We are trying to do something that's going to improve the productivity of the occupants, reduce the risk to the business, improve the asset value, whatever it is. We need to understand where we're starting from so that we can measure success. And in all of these things, we're talking about continuous improvement. And so we need to understand that we are measuring success, but we may be looking at incremental success. We try something, we fail forward because it didn't work exactly the way that we thought it would. So we look at how to improve that situation by failing forward. And that's really what the benchmark is going to allow us to do. It allows us to get a comparator for the future of where we started from. And then, looking at where we want to be in the future against where we are. So now we've done all the assessment of where we are. This is where we want to be in the future. What are the different gaps that we have? How are we going to bridge those? Once we have all of that information, then we can start to build a roadmap of how we want to do an IoT implementation or any type of technology implementation. And what we might find is we've got a series of gaps in our existing setup that we want to close well before we add more complexity to that situation. And I think most of you will find inside your organization, you have that situation occurring. Okay. There is a unique thing about privacy, and I think we should address it right now. Generationally, what I'm seeing heavily is that we certainly understand that a boomer and a millennial or a Gen Z have a very different impression of what privacy is. I look at what my children share on the internet, and the things that they share with their friends, and some of the things that they share in public. I wouldn't say that there is anything particularly wrong with what they're sharing, but what I would say is that it's things that I wouldn't ever consider sharing. And so what we need to understand is there is going to be a difference in the appetite for what information is being shared against the trade-off of the value of the tool that we might get out of it. So what we need to understand is generationally and culturally where our business fits inside that, and what is the risk appetite for our business when we are trading off some elements of privacy for information, and whether we think we could get it adopted inside our cohort of our staff. We talked a little bit about we are the commodity for Google. I would assume that most people haven't really considered it too much. People haven't considered that what they are doing is actually feeding Google. We heard a lot about Facebook in that sense with the last United States election, because they were the data that they were harvesting was being allowed to be used for swaying the election in one way or shape or form. So we understand that there's tremendous power. Certainly Facebook is free for a reason. It's because that we are the product. We're posting a ton of information. We're setting our preferences and and the things that we're interested in. If you look in the feed that you get for Facebook, it's going to have all sorts of things that are telling you what you want because it knows. I often get situations where my feed is picking up on things that I have said and not typed. And so there is something in the tools that we're using, whether it's Siri on my iPhone or Google or Alexa, that are really listening carefully so that they can help me buy the next toaster oven. Not that I ever would really need a toaster oven, but they're looking to help me find that. I think the other thing that we're talking about a lot right now is the ability for us to create a higher level of security. And one of the things that I've been in a few discussions about is the idea that the encryption level and the validation level of blockchain has a tremendous potential for creating a higher level of security. But where we start to get into challenges, if we get to a point where we have workable quantum computers, their ability to start breaking down encryption keys is going to be stronger. And so we have to start thinking about the next steps towards security well before we get there. because encryption, and we talked about the VPN, is only as good as the ability to not predict what that encryption key is. And a quantum computer will have the ability to, in a shorter period of time, far, far, far shorter, predict what the encryption key is and start to break that down. I talked a little bit about facial recognition. It's some of the things, and sometimes I get into the cool factor of technology. Some of the things that I've seen are just fantastic. I mean, it would be great to walk into a restaurant and somebody to brew the coffee the way that you want it to be brewed, and to know that you've been coming because it saw you parking in the parking lot and they prepare a table for you, and all of those things to really eliminate those pauses in productivity where you go to a host stand and you say, I'd like to, if you translate this into the business environment, you go to a host stand, you have to have some form of interface with that person, and then they take you to the table and then they ask you how you want your coffee. If you think about in the business environment, how many interactions that we have like that in a day that sort of reduce our level of productivity. Now, there is an element of human engagement that I think we all crave. But the idea that if you could start to simplify those things, and let's say I could get 15 minutes back in everyone's day in the organization, the productivity gain corporately is massive. And so the facial recognition and the ability to understand a person's needs based on a profile is really, really valuable, but it's got a huge downside or a huge potential negative. And I think we need to weigh those two things out. So I've said a lot of different things, and I assume that you have a lot of questions. And I'd like to start a bit of a dialogue. We can certainly talk for longer than the half hour that Lazo talked about. And we can have this conversation now if you like.
Yes,
Lazo, do you see any questions?
yes. Hello, guys. I'm not sure if you're able to. Let me see my camera on. Yes. Hello, guys. So feel free in the questions tab to share if you want some questions related to the ongoing presentation, related to the webinar. We had few questions already that I already answered related to the presentation. Let me see. Geoff, there's one. What are the new Internet of Things on security guards?
Well, certainly there are wearable technologies that that help sort of govern that interaction between a security guard and an occupant or somebody that isn't meant to be in the organization, and we see that very frequently. I think one of the things that I'm seeing that's really, really interesting right now is the devices themselves inside security systems being able to analyze unusual patterns and then trigger a response in the security system that says, okay, well, I'm gonna watch Lazo because he's looking a little bit shifty, and I'm gonna follow the camera automatically. I'm gonna follow Lazo because maybe he's walking differently or he's loitering, and I'm gonna trade off to the next camera. And then from that point, I'm going to tell a security guard that they want to go and have a conversation with Lazo. You know, a polite conversation, but the system is actually thinking and integrating the way it's operating inside of all of that. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on with security.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say to business leaders that challenge the utilization of the Internet of Things to improve the facility experience overall on the grounds that the upfront investment is very high? This is one of our previous, I would say, delegates, Miss Nora, that have attended the FMP, and she requested this. She's working for Uber at the moment.
Right. So I think that the important piece when you get into that kind of thing is that you really need a sound business case. And I think there are, and I know there are ways to start small. So one of the things is that if you could start small, even using operational dollars to sort of prove a point of value, and there are some small implementations that you could do that would really show value. And then maybe you build a program of projects around that really start to show value, but it really starts with that business case. I think if you can show the productivity gains for the business, that is where the huge savings are. You know, saving operating costs is wonderful. You reduce an energy spend or you know, cleaning expense. But from a business perspective, they are such a small portion of the overall revenue stream, and if you can improve the productivity of an occupant or of a collection of occupants, you've actually done so much better for the organization. 1% gain in productivity against a 1% savings on a facility expense is dramatic.
Great. Thank you very much, Geoff. Are there any technology available that can support the F&B, the food and beverage staff serving the office?
There are. I saw a very interesting video that ISS has done that shows how they are tailoring the food and beverage piece to their head office. So if you were to Google ISS head office IoT in Copenhagen, what you'll see is some of the ideas of how they're looking at to tailor the food and beverage. One of the really interesting things that I see in it is that there's an ability to tailor the waste consumption because they don't overproduce food.
Great idea. There are some questions. Can you share like a small information related to fire safety and Internet of Things?
I haven't seen as much around fire safety, mostly because there is a risk of having things that are not wired in. And so the way that we typically manage our fire safety systems is a little bit different. I have seen really interesting integrations between fire, building automation, and security. Honeywell's got some very interesting things around that, so that they can manage events very differently because they can integrate the data from all three. But I haven't seen it as an Internet of Things application yet.
Yeah, thanks. Do you think that maybe drones can be part of the Internet of Things, maybe in future?
Certainly. I saw a very interesting presentation, and I think it was IBM, using their Watson Analytics platform. And if you think about maybe less applicable to facilities, but I'll get to how you can tie it to facilities. They were doing analysis of high voltage power transmission lines and understanding if the insulators along the power transmission lines were degrading or broken or failing, because as soon as you do that, you start to have power grounding out through the utility poles. And so they were using drones to do that. And the previous method of doing that had been with helicopters and people. And there are often stories of people that have died because of that, because it's a very high risk endeavor to get close enough to see them in a helicopter without crashing your helicopter or somebody getting severely injured. So the drones would capture video data. Watson Analytics would analyze it, and then it would spit out an exception report that would really tell people where to specifically go to look at the problem. And I've seen examples where property surveys roof surveys and all of those types of things are being done with drones that have a similar applicability. So you use the drone as a thing, and you have the ability to survey.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. We'll go a few more questions. How can I make sure that the data can be transferred anywhere outside from the personnel who is managing this data? Will he is with, while he's with us, or he left us?
Yeah, so there is a massive human element to this. I think that there's a couple pieces. The first thing is that there is security structure that you can put around who can access what, and usually you can put infrastructure around how they can move data from one place to another from a security perspective. But I think the weakness in the organization is always going to be a person that we've bestowed an amount of trust on, and they have betrayed that trust. And I think that's the big challenge. We get, as part of our employment agreements with that person, we have a non-disclosure agreement, which could carry legal action with it if we wanted to. But we have to trust the people that work for us. And so the challenge is trying to balance the amount of access the person has and the ability to do certain things with information versus the trust. I think if you were to look at it, I think from a data perspective, you would typically layer the access to the data being completely inaccessible as raw data by the person. And the insights and the analytics would be something that they would have access to from a reporting perspective, but they'd never have access to see and touch the raw data. It's a fairly common method in database management.
Geoff, would you think that preventive maintenance way of work will be changed with using the Internet of Things?
Yeah, I think where it really will change is that we're going to be doing a lot more predictive maintenance, and we'll be doing a lot more fault detection well before we get to preventative maintenance, which should eliminate some of the preventative tools. So we're doing things on a frequency because we want to make sure that we're seeing and touching those pieces of equipment. If we can get quality predictive maintenance tools in place using IoT, then we have an opportunity to change or eliminate things that we were doing on a frequency because we know what's going on with that piece of equipment at any given time.
Yeah, yeah. And few, I would say, last questions. What is the right approach to make sure that the facility occupants and visitors will react in a proper way towards an expensive technologies that I'm investing on, and will not misuse, and the not misuse of it?
It's an interesting one. It's a people thing. I think what you need to understand, the first piece you need to understand is the mixture between occupants and visitors. Because I think, if you have far more occupants than you do visitors, maybe you tailor the tools that you're using more to the occupants, where you actually have some level of control. Because there's an employment relationship. Typically, you don't have that same level of control with the visitor. I haven't seen anything that really talks about how you, I guess if you're looking at truly just a misuse of the actual equipment, typically you obscure the equipment from accessibility by people. So sensors are typically embedded in seating surfaces for usage sensors. A lot of the things would be behind the walls and above the ceiling or in tamper-proof scenarios. So you wouldn't be able to sort of cause damage if that's what you're caught. If the question is coming from Ahmed, if that's what we're talking about.
According to you, which company is leading in Internet of Things FM?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I think that there are a lot of great companies. There's some companies in Europe that have really, really interesting applications of tools. There's companies in North America that have really good analytics packages. I think it's a fairly immature market still, and I think to weigh in on who's better versus who isn't is actually quite a difficult thing. The other piece to that is the application that you're looking to have from an Internet of Things may be different than others, and there may be a better choice for you than another organization.
Yeah, understood. Let me see. I'm just looking through the questions for the time being. Have the Internet of Things been used for patient safety so far? Such as avoiding patient fall on or some other incidents?
Oh, I'm not aware of any. I do know that we are getting to be more and more robust with RFID tagging of patients that have either a higher risk of concern. So it's either mental health, infants, senior citizens. So that I know that there is a lot of investment in organizations looking at creating tools and technologies that will allow you to track and create geofencing for people inside a building. But I don't believe it's really Internet of Things as much as a kind of a hardwired purpose-built system that uses RFID as the tracking tag.
Yeah. And then one of the last questions, what are the concerns you foresee, the operational issues, especially related to the critical equipments in the smart buildings?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that there's a possibility of the pendulum swinging too far, where we rely entirely around our technology and don't rely on first principles. And I think that's going to be the fine balance as we get to the point where we are really heavily reliant on a computer screen telling us what's going on with a critical piece of equipment versus still having that touch point with the equipment. Touching, seeing, we know that we can have sensors that get fouled. We know that we've had, temperature sensors in buildings for years that need to be recalibrated, and all of those things. I think that there's still a piece that requires, whether it's daily rounds or some regularized investigation to that unit to confirm that everything is working properly and that the sensors are working properly.
Yeah. Well, Geoff, I think we are almost, close to the end of this webinar. I would like to invite you all to shortly, within, let's say, couple more weeks from now, 19th of May, actually it's like 2 weeks from now, we will be running a 3-day program on the essentials of the Internet of Things in the FM. So it's a 3 days of a live instructor-led session where mostly you get understand of the importance of the technology in the FM, understanding the principles and value propositions behind the wide variety technologies that we are using in the FM as a profession, develop a comprehensive FM IT roadmap for your organization. So I would say close this webinar with, I'll share with you one email afterward with, first of all, thank you for taking part of this webinar. Thank you for your time. I'm happy that maybe we've answered some of your key questions. Geoff, thank you very much for your time as well. We look forward for the program organizing on 19. And since it's been very trendy and very popular, I'm happy that we answered a few of the questions that the people in the audience wanted to hear.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.